Creo's been dark for over 4 days now. Launches are continuing, but we've been unable to reach anyone inside the complex. I need you to take a team there, use drones and bots to do the exploratory work, but I want boots on the ground. I want a hardwire link established so we can view the feed as it happens, and get somebody up to low orbit. Our satellites there are picking up an unidentified particulate dispersal from the latest launch. It's inert so far, but it's completely different from their previous payloads. I want to know what it is.
Mr. Secretary, we're in position. Hardline established. We've sent in drone reconnaissance units as per procedure, but we lost contact with them shortly after insertion. Strike team is moving in now.
What the? Captain? Captain! I want another team in there right now! See how they run. See how they run. They said free, free, free. This is our goal ticket. I'm gonna get my ass out of here.
That last voice was really familiar. Like, some of the other voices might supposed to have been familiar. Well, he's still alive. Alive enough for DLC. Well, damn it, stop teasing. You know I don't like that. What is that? Ah. So I guess he lost his leg power. He got For the Good of Mankind achievement. I wonder if we got that one from doing the virus thing. Maybe not. Actually, maybe not. I don't know. I wonder how that would have affected the ending at all. All right. Well, that was The Surge. This is typically where I will give my overall thoughts on the game, give it a little rating, etc., etc. Overall, I definitely enjoyed it. Coming from Lords of the Fallen, the last game, again, I feel like I was one of the few people who liked Lords of the Fallen. Yes, Lords of the Fallen definitely had some serious issues, both mechanics, gameplay, and bug-wise, but it was fun. Overall, I enjoyed my experience with it. And I do think this is better. The combat's better. It definitely does not feel as clunky, as that was like the #1 complaint I and others had with Lords of the Fallen, was the clunky combat. Everything felt slow, and like even the fast weapons felt slow and whatnot. But this game did not have that. Obviously, the bigger weapons were slower, but there were fast weapons to make up, like, you know, that were supposed to be quick, as they should be. So, and I also, if you just feel like overall it felt better, the dodging, the combo system, like the kind of jump in attacks, the slide attacks, that kind of stuff, all felt better overall. The cutting off limbs system was also really neat. I thought that was cool. A really good, just cool idea, right? The whole like, oh, you know, I need to, that guy's wearing a helmet type that I need, so I need to focus on his head and cut his head off and get the schematic to make that helmet. I think it'd have been a little bit cooler, if not a little bit more morbid and effed up, if you cut their head off and then just wore their helmet. But I understand why they had to make, you know, why they had you make it first. So that, I mean, that's fine. That's not, I wouldn't even call it a complaint. I just would think that would be kind of cool. But I also like the upgrade system. I talked about it before, and I know it seems like a weird thing to talk about in a game like this, but I like the crafting system. It was very simple. It was not confusing at all. It didn't feel burdensome. It made sense. It was easy to remember because, you know, Mark 1 is worse than Mark 2. Mark 2 is worse than Mark 3. And all the components, you didn't have to juggle your inventory and all this other crap that you had to do in a lot of games like this. I really liked it. I think it was, again, I liked that it was simple. I knew that, oh, hey, I've got a Mark II weapon. I'm in a new area. enemies are dropping Mark III parts, I know I can farm the heads and the arms and the legs and the chests to upgrade my existing gear. I love that. It was very simple, and I didn't put hardly any thought into it, which is what a crafting system should be in a game like this. So I don't know how many people complimented this game on it, but I think it deserves high praise on that, because it did feel like I could keep the same armor throughout almost the entire game, and with minimal effort. This damn song too. I like this song. I get what they were doing. They played the song all the time when you were in the med bay. It was supposed to be kind of the safe space song, if you will. Think of like Resident Evil, right? With Resident Evil, you had that particular song that always plays when you're in the safe room and where you can save and your chest is and all that, where you could never be attacked. They were kind of going for that same thing here, and it worked. Like, it actually worked. I think the song is too short and it loops a bit too much. Which, by the way, I think this is like a song that they paid somebody for. Like, I don't think they made it. The person who made the song didn't just make it for the game, is what I'm trying to say. I think it's actually been around a while. But I like it because the game is so brutal and it's so high tech, and you got all these mechs and shit running around. But then you go into your med bay and it's got this like country sounding, like I don't know, heartwarming is not really the right word. This kind of like feel good song. Even though it's actually kind of depressing, talking about a guy who's like just kind of going through life, but feels like there's more to life, and he just isn't going to get it, or he hasn't gone to get it, and maybe it's him being older and reflection, feeling like he's wasted his life. Whatever. This isn't what this video is about. But anyway, I think it was a great song that kind of contrasts the brutal nature and the high-tech nature of the game. But at the same time, it worked well because you're also, I think, trying to go for that whole blue collar spin, right? You said spin because of that tailspin. But they were trying to go for that blue collar angle, right? Because if you think about it, the guys doing these types of work, yes, it's a high-tech environment with these high-tech suits, but these people are basically doing blue collar type jobs, smelting and a lot of factory work, heavy lifting, people that would normally be driving heisters and forklifts, which there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but I'm just saying that typically when people have that stereotype or think of those type of people, there's a stereotype of them probably listening, being more like old-fashioned, more conservative, maybe listening to country music, that kind of thing. So I think that's why they chose that type of song. And it, like I said, I think it looped a little bit too shortly because like it would kind of get on my nerves every now and then if I was in the med bay a little bit too long. But for the most part, it really did kind of hit that tone where every time I heard that song, I got that, like that you know what I'm talking about, that feeling of being back at the med bay or whatnot. But anyway, so some of the negatives, as far as the combat goes, I feel like at first enemies did way too much damage. I feel like they overcompensated by giving enemies just insane, like either you too low of health or enemies just doing way too much damage, because it felt like you make one mistake and that's half your life gone. You could literally be 1 and 2 shot in this game fairly frequently, especially early on before you get better armor and more hit point mods, things like that. And that doesn't feel like challenging. That feels cheap. It always just feels cheap to get like one shot, especially one shot. And especially when the attack doesn't look like it's that brutal. Like, for example, I think the flamethrower guys would do that very slight little nudge with their flamethrower, like not even shooting fire. They would just kind of nudge you with the gun. And it did preposterous amounts of damage. So it definitely felt cheap in that regard. And there's a few things that compound upon themselves that cause problems with the combat. 1, the extremely high damage that enemies do. 2, the fact that enemies don't really stagger very much unless you hit them at unarmored locations, which even then is inconsistent because 1, they don't always stagger when you hit unarmored areas, which they shouldn't, but you kind of see where I'm getting. And 2, even if you target an unarmored area, you might still hit the armored area because of the way you swing, which again, that's totally fine because it makes sense. Just because you're aiming for the right arm doesn't mean you're going to hit it right in the middle of chaotic combat, right? You're not, a trained warrior with 30 years of experience. You were going in here for a freaking job at a factory, right? So it makes sense that, even a trained warrior wouldn't always hit the exact spot that they're aiming at. And again, so that's totally fine. But what happens is a lot of these attacks don't stagger. So the enemy will just hit you. And it feels like you're wailing on the enemy and they hit you once and boom, there goes half your life. So that was a big part of the problem. Another thing that compounded onto this issue is that a lot of the attacks, a lot of the button presses for attacks would lead to multi-hit combos. So if I do a slide attack and then hit my button one more time, I might do 3 attacks. And because of the speed of the weapon, and because the enemy's not being staggered, that's a bad thing, because that leaves me open to being attacked, right? So I go in, slide, I just want to do quick 2 hits and get out, right? So I slide in, hit again, and get ready to dodge. It's like, oh, nope, you actually are winding up for a 3rd hit. And during that time, the enemy has already started swinging themselves, and because you're not always staggering them, they're going to hit you, and again, doing a ton of damage. So in that regard, it felt very frustrating, because that's a big problem in a game like this, right? Where you feel like you don't have complete control of your character. That's what's so important in a game like this. If you're going to have such high penalties for making mistakes and making it so incredibly easy to die, you need to have incredibly precise control over your character. And when there's so many button mashes that will cause you to go into a multi-swing combo that you cannot interrupt, that's a problem. That's a serious problem, especially with slower weapons. With a fast weapon, yes, you might get that extra hit and still get out because it's quick, but sometimes you don't. Like, for example, with the claws that I use, the firebugs, the jump-in attack for most weapons, like where you just hop forward and press an attack, is just 1 attack. With those, it's 2. So you go in for that quick attack so that you can get out, but you do that second swing, and a lot of times that second swing is enough to get you hit, especially because the claws don't have very high impact, meaning that the enemy's probably not going to be staggered by your hit. And because the enemy reacts so quick, there's a very high chance they're going to hit you anyway, even though you were going in for a quick hit, which negates one of the reasons you get something like claws, is because you want to be able to go in, get a few very quick hits, and back out. The whole point is, yeah, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but you kind of, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Get in there, pop them a few times, get out. That's the kind of combat I would envision for a fast weapon like that. Or even just dodging around their attacks, not even going back out all the way and going back in, just dodging their attacks. And you can't do that a lot of times because too often sequences of button presses will end up with multiple attacks. Now, when you're talking about, okay, if I hit R1 4 times, now I'm going to actually hit 5 or 6 times, it's slightly more forgivable. Slightly, not really, but it's a little bit more forgivable, because you're often can just be like, okay, well, I'll just know not to hit the button that many times. I'll just hit it 3 times. But when it's very, very short combos, again, the slide in attack followed by a single button press equaling 3 attacks, that's not good. Why put those together in the first place? Just split them up. It feels like they did that on purpose so that you could only get 1 attack, and then you have to back out because they don't want you to be able to go in quickly like that, which seems silly. So why would you combine the attacks like that when, if you made it a combo, but after the first hit, before the second hit, you could dodge out to break it? Fine, that's fine. Or block or do whatever to stop it, that would be okay, but you can't. Once you start that 2-hit or 3-hit combo, that's it. You have to wait for it to complete. So I feel like there are some nuances there that make things feel not as good as they could have been, but overall it was good. Now, a few people have asked me, where would I rate the combat on Surge compared to the obvious comparisons? Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Neo, Lords of the Fallen. I would put it probably a little bit below Dark Souls, maybe a little bit on par. I like that this is more action-oriented with the ducking in and getting some quick hits and all of that. It feels more active, and especially with targeting the certain body parts, depending on either if you want the armor piece or if you just want to kill the enemy quickly. I definitely feel like the combat overall in that regard is more satisfying, but I feel Dark Souls is a lot more fair. And one of the great things about Dark Souls, and I swear to God, I won't go on forever here, but one of the great things about Dark Souls is it feels fair, right? The combat's very slow, and it's not overly engaging. Even in the Dark Souls 3, where they tried to make it a little bit better, but it's still Dark Souls combat, it feels fair for the most part. Yes, some enemies do insane damage, but typically your little pissant mobs that you run into aren't two-shotting you, right? Unless they have the only time you're going to typically take huge damage, bosses excluded obviously, is if there's a big wind-up, like an obvious wind-up type attack. That definitely did not feel to be the case in this game. This game feels like a lot of times the very fast attacks would still do crazy amounts of your hit points or of your damage. So in that regard, they're kind of close. Like Surge has some things over Dark Souls that I like a lot better. But Dark Souls feels more consistent, I guess is the word I would use. When I press a button 2 or 3 times in Dark Souls, I know I'm going to swing 2 or 3 times. There, of course, are some attacks with some weapons that do multiple hits, but it's the exception, not the rule. Same goes for Bloodborne and with Neo. And in fact, the times that, and especially in Neo, where you would hit the button a couple times and then you would start attacking more than you pressed buttons. In other words, if I pressed the button 3 times, you attack 4 times. I hated that. Like, I typically did not like that because of the exact reasons I've talked about earlier. But as far as the scaling, I would say this is about, if you consider the goods and the negatives, maybe on Dark Souls level, maybe a little lower, just because I feel like the 2-shot stuff is super cheap. I feel like with Dark Souls, I can be pretty darn conservative, and if I do, I'll be fine. Like, it might take me longer, but I'll get where I need to go. In Surge, I don't feel that way. I feel like I can be pretty darn cautious and still die because of, oops, you got 2-shotted. Like, that's it. Like, you attacked, you made one mistake, and there goes 3/4 of your health. Or just really cheap stuff, like the pits, like the random pits that have no place to be in there other than to just randomly kill you. That felt super cheap. Like, we died a few times, and especially pits that aren't even pits, where you drop down like 5 feet and your character dies because you're not supposed to go there, so it just kills you. We ran into a few of those as well, so there's a lot of those cheap attacks. But yeah, I would put it about on par with Dark Souls, maybe a little lower just because of the inconsistency, and it doesn't feel as fair as Dark Souls. Obviously, Dark Souls was hard, but it was fair. And then above Dark Souls would be Bloodborne, and then on a whole nother level is Neo. Like, nothing compares to Neo right now. Like, it's not even close. Neo's combat is leagues better than these games. I don't even think it's comparable, to be quite honest. And they're all better than Lords of the Fallen. Again, I like Lords of the Fallen for the most part, but the combat here is definitely better. I liked how bloody and visceral it was. I love the slowdown attacks when you cut an arm off and shit, like the slow-mo. That never gets old to me. That's awesome. I love that kind of stuff. I think that was cool. And again, I love the whole cutting off parts to get their weapons and their upgrades and stuff like that. As far as map design, I like that there was a lot of shortcuts, so that the game, I feel like the developers did recognize that they killed you very quickly and that you would sometimes just die out of nowhere. And so they put tons of shortcuts, which is good, but part of the problem is it seems like they spent a lot of time trying to make sure there's tons of loopbacks to the ops station. And to do that, they ended up putting a lot of a lot of tunnels that look exactly the same. So you end up in this tunnel network, this super tight tunnel network with all these elevators and paths. There's nothing distinguishing them. And I mean, I'm bad with the directions anyway, but getting lost in those little tunnels, like trying to remember which ways to the shortcut, which ways to progress, and it just gets worse and worse through the game as you go. It's just more and more confusing. And again, they're just indistinguishable from one another. And you just got to figure it out. Now, they do try to help that a little bit with the signs that will point you to ops, which I love. but it's still like I feel like the tunnels got overused again, especially near the end. I feel like they started relying on those tunnels a lot, and you're just in tunnels so much, and I'm just completely turned around. Like, have I been here before? I have no idea. But story-wise too, I'll be honest, I didn't keep up with the story at all. Some of the characters are, I mean, okay. They didn't really go into depth with any of them. I kind of like the Ira lady. Like, I was really curious what was going on with her. I have no idea what that happened at the end where they're saying like Warren, cousin Warren or Uncle Warren or something like that. I don't know if it was just trying to get in my head or if I missed something, which is highly likely because honestly, I only half paid attention to the audio logs. I don't really know why. I typically like the story in games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Neo. Like, I try to keep up with it. But in this game, I don't know. I didn't really draw me in. But that, to me, that's okay because I don't really care that much. I mean, yes, it's definitely cool in Dark Souls and Bloodborne especially. I think they have good backstories and lore and all that. But in this game, I don't know. I never really focused on it, and I don't really know why. As far as the setting itself, I think the setting is awesome. I like you wearing the sweet mech suit and fighting other people in these mechs or fighting the futuristic equivalent of bulldozers and backhoes and stuff. I think that's cool as shit. Like, that's neat to me. I think that was really, really cool idea. And fighting through these factory like, yes, there wasn't a lot of variety in where you fought, to be fair, but I like the whole factory environment. I think that was neat. I really like that aspect of this game. I would hope if there's a Surge 2, they mix it up a bit. Like, I would hope like maybe we're going to start moving out of the factory. Maybe you start off in the factory, but then you go into the city or something like that. That would be pretty neat. And I do hope there's a Surge 2 because overall, I did enjoy the game. I did like it quite a bit. There was a lot of frustration in the combat, and the patch helped with some of that. And I'm not even going to go to the patch because this has already gone on too long. But some of the patch stuff did fix some things, and they did change some things to make things not quite as insta-kill brutal as it was before, which I think is a good thing. And there is a new game plus, which I don't plan to play, by the way. I'm going to press the button though. I'm just kind of curious. New game plus unlocked. Congratulations on beating the game. But wait, there's more. Select continue and then select your last save game, now marked with NG Plus, to start a new journey. With new challenges and surprises, you'll keep all your gear, weapons, and character progress. Well, that's cool. I do not plan on doing that. I think it's cool that it's there. I think it's awesome that it's there. I've heard from people say that New Game Plus is actually a lot easier. I guess it doesn't scale that much. But yeah, overall, again, I really like the game. I enjoyed it. There's a lot of frustrating parts, and somebody also asked me if I think this game is harder than Neo and Dark Souls Bloodborne. I would say yes, but not necessarily in a good way. It felt more difficult in a cheap way. Neo definitely had the same issue where, like, sometimes if you got yourself in a bind, you could go from full health to dead. Like, if you got yourself out of stamina, it was very possible to be 100% health and go to dead. Due to the way the stagger mechanics works. That felt like it happened way more in the Surge. And it felt a lot cheaper in the Surge. And that's why, and you're much, much more likely to die in the Surge. The other reason I would consider this game harder is because there's less quote-unquote cheap or cheesy ways to get around the difficulty. In Dark Souls or Bloodborne, you could out-level. You could just farm and grind and get a bunch of levels. You could also do co-op, like summon a phantom and have them help you. That made the bosses in areas way, way easier. In Neo, you could also grind and over-level, or there were certain weapon combos and spells that made things a ton easier. Like, for example, the spear, mid-spear combos, where you could do mid-spear the entire game and just go from start to finish and beat the game with mid-spear and do nothing else because it was so incredibly good. On top of that, you've got the sloth spell, which reduces enemy boss speed to crazy low levels. So I think from that perspective, I would say yes, this game is harder, but again, not necessarily in a good way. Overall, though, as far as my rating, between 1 and 10, where 10 is an amazing, absolutely you must play a game. 5 is a game that has just about equal parts good and equal parts bad. I would say this game ranks a solid 7, at least a 7. maybe a 7.5, but probably closer to a 7, which again, my 7 is not an IGN 7 where the game sucks, it gets a 7. It's a good game. It's got significantly more good than bad. And anyone who is a fan of the Dark Souls type formula, the Souls-like, I definitely, without a question, suggest this game. Even if you didn't like Lords of the Fallen, I definitely suggest you check out The Surge, because I do feel like it fixes a lot of the issues that Lords of the Fallen had. In particular, I mean, the number 1 through 10 would be the clunky combat. That's mostly gone. Again, it's a bit clunky if you use heavier weapons, but that's the way it should be. Big damage weapons shouldn't be fast. And as far as a price, what I would suggest you pay for the game, if you're going to play through one time and you're a big Souls fan, maybe around 40 to 50, I think would be enough to get your money's worth. If you're going to play through the game and then do a new game plus, full price, $60. I think you could easily get the 50. Is it 50 or 60? Whatever it is, I think it's worth the full price if you're going to do a new game plus, because I feel like there's a lot there. And again, I'm actually kind of interested in playing a new game plus. Like, if it was just me playing games, I would look up the stuff that I missed. I would try to beat bosses in the alternate version or alternate ways to get the version 2.0 weapons, which, by the way, really cool feature that they brought from Lords of the Fallen, I think. That's a really awesome feature. I think that's really, really neat, trying to figure out the alternate ways to beat enemies and stuff. But anyway, if New Game Plus, yeah, pay the full price. You'll enjoy it. But anyway, that was The Search. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks again to Gage for your continued support on Patreon. Very much appreciate it. Make sure you guys leave comments. Let me know what you thought of the entire series. Give me your summary, what you thought of the series, both of the game itself and just of this Let's Play. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback. Also, like the videos if you did like them. It does help me out a bunch, and I will see you next time.